Going to now move to our next session, which is Race in Action, Part 1. And we are going to be talking to, I'm really excited, to some of our colleagues about some of the work that they have been doing in that framework area that we were talking about earlier: normalize, organize, operationalize, and assess. So joining us, we have Becky Suttell from the Department of Parks and Recreation, Cynthia Hernan from Community Planning, Housing, and Development, Lisa Wilson, Christine Baker, and Laura Castro, each from Department of Environmental Services, and Michael-Dharma Irwin and Anita Friedman from the Department of Human Services. And so if we can go to the next slide. I just want to tee this up for us. We talked a little bit about the racial equity framework earlier, which is normalize, organize, operationalize, assess. And for those who are not familiar or are aware, this is our theory model of change. And then in the middle of that is our equity lens of who benefits, who's burdened, who's missing, how do we know? And so our next slide, to talk about the first presentation, we want to talk a little bit about normalizing and what does it actually mean to normalize racial equity. And it's really what we said earlier, how we ensure we have a shared terminology and understanding around racial equity. And it's the conversations, the engagement, the interactions. And so with that, I'm going to welcome Becky and Cynthia to talk a little bit about what that means and some work that they have done around normalizing.
Hello, everyone. My name is Becky Suttell. This is Cynthia Hernan. And we are with, we had done a collaboration to help normalize conversations on race, and so wanted to talk to you about it. So you can go to the next slide. All right, so this was back in 2022. I know in our department we had just kind of formed a team, and we wanted to have some opportunities a little bit more structured for our staff to be able to get together, talk about race, and really start to help normalize those conversations. And so what we wanted to do was something monthly, just to kind of keep it on everyone's radar, get us talking and thinking. And the approach that we took was really looking at, well, there's a lot going on in the world, and how do we bridge that and bring it to our departments in a way that it feels safe to staff, also helps teach them something in a neutral and informative way. So that was kind of the basis for what we wanted to do. So we ended up, the collaboration really started, and I think Cynthia will talk a little bit more about it, but really it was, we were talking, people were talking about what we were doing in our departments and thought, you know, this is a really great way to partner and to really encourage both departments, CPHD and DPR, in engaging in some opportunities together. So I'm a who, what, when person. So our target group was all of the employees in our departments. It was not required, it was encouraged, because we really wanted people who wanted to learn about these different areas to come together and learn together. We did them monthly for about an hour and a half. It was led by a vendor, Leroy Thompson, who we had used in our department for some organized training the year before, so we felt like there was some comfort there. We ended up doing it virtually through Teams for a couple of reasons. One, the vendor prefers to use a virtual environment, but I think more importantly, it allowed people to be able to engage and only take a little bit short of a break during the session to be able to participate. And we were hoping that also by bringing together the two departments that would help. So we, as far as the how, we would promote them just through email, and I'll show you an example on the next slide, but staff would then sign up in the Learning Center for the sessions. We would generally promote them 3 at a time, so quarterly, so they could see what's available and what they might be interested in. Of course, everyone always wonders about the cost. Each session was about $900. It was through one of our county vendors, and with collaborating together, we were able to do some cost sharing, which really helped us to be able to do more sessions than I had originally planned for. All right, so next slide. So here's just an example. We called it Let's Talk About It because we wanted people to come and talk about it, whatever the concept was. Here's some of the first ones that we did around Black Lives Matter and cancel culture. So the idea was that they would come together, learn about these topics, all sides of the topics, and then have a moment to engage with each other. Next slide. So here's all of the topics. We ended up doing 9 total, and we'll show you the numbers in a minute, but we felt like once we got to the 9, we're like, I feel like we've hit all of the topics that were really on the front of people's minds, and so we took a strategic approach and stopped. And of course, are looking at other things. And what we generally would meet with the vendor to look at what are kind of some things that are showing up, what are we hearing staff talk about, what should we bring to our team? So we met and came up with these different areas. We also consulted, I know I consulted our equity team. We looked at consulting other members in our departments as well, just to try to come up with ideas that might be engaging. These weren't trainings. They kind of started looking like a training, but they were definitely opportunities to engage with each other and facilitate conversation. All right, next. So here's the overall numbers. As you can see, like I said, it kind of teetered down towards the end. That could be for a lot of reasons. It was spring. I don't know. DPR is crazy in the spring. But it could be that, again, we kind of had gone through some of the areas, or we just kind of had run its course. But overall, I felt the participation was pretty well. Actually, no, Cynthia's going to talk about all that part. But it was great to be able to see the staff engage in topics that are generally could be very polarizing, and the staff had thought that was helpful. All right, next. So just a quick timeline of what we did. So in spring of 2020, that's where I started meeting with different vendors to try to get a sense of who might be able to support us with this idea that we had of these monthly engagements. We then met with CPHD, tried to brainstorm ideas to get us to where we wanted to be, and also met with the vendor. We kicked off in August, and then did a midpoint about 5 sessions in, just to see how everything's going and adjust. And then our final session was in May.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful, good. First off, I really want to thank the leadership of DPR and particularly Becky for just inviting us in, making us feel comfortable to partner with another department. So I really want to thank you for that. Thank you. And so in CPHD, I think Arlova and Jill are here. It's brighter up here than you would ever imagine if you're sitting down there. We were all talking about that. So anyway, in CPHD, we have made, I think, a lot of progress. And as we all know, the work definitely will continue. So what we started to do in our department, really in brief, is we put out an RFP and a statement of work, actually to work with another county vendor. One kind of rose to the top. We entered into a contract, and it was facilitation on just a proprietary tool that they had. Long story short, we decided we wanted to roll it out from our leadership team down to our extended management team, which is essentially everyone in CPHD. We're an organization of about 200 plus folks. So roll it out to all of our line supervisors at all multiple levels, and then roll it out to our line staff. And our thinking is sort of lead everyone, I think as the last panel was referring to, lead from where you are, but we definitely want to make a point that it really does need to start at the top, particularly in the normalizing phase, because we have more information about it and we've had the benefit of attending various trainings. But anyway, we got about, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 or so courses in, and we decided to pivot. And part of that is, and I have it on the last slide, is about reading the room and what's important to the folks that you're working with, and hopefully, providing a little education with. We decided to pivot. We took some time out, and then libraries came calling, and so we're just absolutely fortunate to be able to partner with them, and in many ways kind of come on their heels of the work that was already kind of put up. So the framework, I want to speak a little bit to add to, Becky, what you were saying. The facilitation was essentially, if you think about a traditional training, and I come from a training background, you think about sort of what do you want to achieve, and the expectation of anyone, regardless of the audience, is you're going to be told something, right? I need to walk away with a list of things I need to practice or a fact to remember, for example. What we did is facilitation, and it's a mind bender. It's a change in thinking. And so what we asked Leroy is essentially, well, I'm going to move on for essence of time. We did the history of the topic, be it reparations, be it Black Lives Matter, and then we talked about, what are those questions or concerns that you may have as participants in the 9 sessions? And then secondly, what questions, what takeaways do you have? And it was really about increasing awareness around topics that otherwise you would think in the normalizing stage would be maybe a bit too far, maybe a bit bold. I have one for Pete, if he is still here. Essentially, we decided not to walk on eggs during the normalizing phase, but to essentially break a few, but to catch them and to keep it and to build that safe environment that, Becky, that you were speaking to. So, next slide, please. Okay, very briefly. Whether training or facilitation, we got a fair amount of feedback. I think we're hoping for a little bit more, but it is what it is. And so what people really liked was the vendor. He was very neutral, he's very informed, and was incredibly brilliant about drawing people out, particularly on this topic. We did a lot of peer-to-peer sharing, whether in small breakout sessions or in a larger group. And then I just spoke to sort of safety with a nudge. We would challenge people, but meet them where they are and create that safety by just how we show up and how we're engaging in the topic to create safety for them and encourage them to do the same. Do different, they wish it was training. We did provide a lot of information. We only had, I think, the 90-minute sessions, and so we did cram a lot in there. I think that's a lesson learned for any of us. Takeaways and applications, again, this wasn't a training with sort of a hard outcome of things you'd walk away with, but more to sort of stir the pot, stir the thinking, maybe expand people's horizons. And then people wanted to have some in-person options, and perhaps we will be able to do that. Last slide, please. Okay, so winding down, I think our major takeaways are it's okay to be bold during the normalizing phase. Just throw anything up against sort of the sticky wall and see what sticks. I think we had some fun with this. I think we learned a few things. Find the right partners and create safety. We had a terrific partner who basically had the same vision we did, and likewise 2 departments sharing the same. It doesn't have to be perfect. We learned things that worked, things that didn't work. We have ideas for future things, so just keep trying. This is a marathon, not a sprint. We all know, we've heard that one before. Socialize facilitation, what it is and what it is not when you start out. So really kind of level set those norms and expectations about how people will receive information and the expectations around how they'll engage with it. And then last, mix it up during normalizing, try different things, see what works and doesn't. And again, this work will continue. It's a never-ending sort of quest and journey. So thank you.
No, I was going to say this was just one thing that we did for normalizing. There are a lot more, so just wanted to highlight that as well. But thanks.
Thank you, Cynthia and Becky. So now we're going to talk about organize and have an example of that. And when we think about organize, it's really just ensuring that we have a structure in place to support and implement our work and sustain it, and that racial equity as a practice can really be, institutionalized as the standard, and just what we want to do, and it's supported through our resources. So now we're going to hear from Lisa Wilson, Department of Environmental Services, to talk a little bit about what they did around organize.
Thank you, Samia, and hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to give you the mechanics of how our committee came together, but I think what's equally as important is to sort of take a step back and look at the lessons that we've learned along the way in the process, and honestly, the lessons that we're actually still learning today, because as has been said numerous times today, this work is evolving and it's always changing. So with that, next slide. The DEI committee was formed in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020 and the renewed racial justice movement that followed. Response to do something in our department was very swift and we moved very quickly. And that's basically the takeaway from this slide, that The committee formed very fast. There was a complete sense of urgency. On Juneteenth, our director, Greg Emanuel, announced a commitment to DEI in the department. About a week or so later, there was a draft charter, an application floating around the department for what we were then calling a racial steering committee, which later went on to become the DEI committee. In early August, we kicked off a department-wide initiative that was a multi-pronged approach to DEI. One of those facets was the formation of the DEI committee. Communications went out to staff to apply for the committee. By September, we were closing it was the closing date for applications, and by November, early November, we had a fully baked 13-member team ready to rock and roll, ready to get to work. So things happened really quickly. I'm gonna stick a pin right there and pause to say that we have a small support team that's worked behind the scenes from the beginning with this work. And one of our mantras was, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. So next slide. As you can imagine, we were far from perfect. There were a lot of lessons to be learned. One of which, the first one, readiness assessment. It would have been very helpful to slow down, take a step back, do a readiness assessment. Readiness assessment would have revealed where staff and leadership fell on the spectrum regarding their knowledge of and thoughts on racial equity. It would have identified how hard it might be for us to normalize conversations within the department. And it would have actually helped us to better identify what type of time and resources we needed to put forth, and maybe how big the committee needed to be, maybe what the committee needed to focus on. Advocacy and leadership, and this has been stressed again today as well. We had a fierce and committed leader who was driving the bus when we first started this process. But I'm not sure that everyone felt that way. And the reality of it is that we need advocates at all levels of leadership to have that type of commitment or have some commitment to this type of work. And then lastly, it would have been really helpful to commission a third-party subject matter expert in the beginning. At the time that we started, we didn't have common vocabulary. We didn't have tools to have some of those difficult conversations. And a neutral subject matter expert would have been very helpful in helping us to balance imposing our own views while trying to collect the views from staff. Next slide, please. All right, so what you see here are highlights from our charter. It basically says that the committee is going to be an advocate for staff and that the committee is also going to advise leadership. What you don't see is that in the process, the charter went through multiple iterations, and as it went through those iterations, it began to really empower the committee to not only recommend, but to implement. So there are a lot of expectations placed on the committee, and so much so that the initiative was really heavily bottom up as opposed to top down. So just to give you a sense of what some of those expectations are, the committee is to establish annual DEI goals in a work program. The committee is to analyze data, produce an annual report, facilitate town halls, be a champion for racial equity across DES, just to name a few. I'm emphasizing the bottom-up approach so that you'll better understand why we are organized the way that we are. Next slide. So here's our org chart. We basically now have a 16-member team, and each of those 16 members are divided up into one of 4 subcommittees. Subcommittees are policy, data, recruitment and retention, and training and development. We also have 2 at-large members, and the thought behind the at-large members at the time was that they would sort of fill in where the subcommittee has the most work and sort of balance things out. Outside of the committee, we have leadership team sponsors, and those individuals are deputy director level leadership team members who are aligned with one of each of the 4 subcommittees. And then I mentioned our little internal work group before. We have a support committee that consists of HROD folks and comms people like myself. Next slide, please. So we have learned a lot about how we are organized, and so I just want to take a little bit of time on this one. First point is organize for your capabilities. If we had slowed down just a little bit from the beginning to understand what it really means to do true racial equity work, what that really entails, maybe we would have discovered that the department and the county, for that matter, weren't quite ready for that type of work. And this is what I mean by that. A lot of the recommendations that have come out of the subcommittee work require data to establish a baseline and metrics that rely on data to really measure progress. And we have not at this point been able to attain all that we need to do that. And to that point, point number 2, it would have been okay to start small. You know, when our committee gave its first presentation to leadership, it was about 9 months in. And there were no less than 3 priorities that came as recommendations out of each of those subcommittees. So we're talking about a list of 12 things that the committee is saying, let's do this. And so that was probably overwhelming for leadership and honestly not realistic given the number of people that were on the committee to actually do that work. Which brings me to my next point. More members would have been better. When you're thinking about how many people really need to be on a committee, you know, we have a work frame of mind where there's this optimal number where too few is not good, too many, no bueno. But in this particular case, in a voluntary committee, you have to really think about work fluctuations. We started out with 13 members, but people retired, people left the county, people's work fluctuated. We recruited again in 2022. We recruited to the extent that we have had a 22-member committee that has now whittled down to 16 members for the same reasons. So point number 4, slow down and do pulse checks. This should actually read slow down and do more frequent pulse checks. Our committee has struggled for a while with the bottom-up approach and the balance between action and recommending with leadership. Some of the questions that have been asked and that we're all trying to come to terms with is how much authority does the committee really have? How does the committee move from recommending to implementing without the proper level of authority? How does leadership give more direction and have more visibility without seeming, optically to be heavily guiding the work? So next slide, please. We have made some progress and we have had some challenges. And I think if you ask anyone on the committee, they will say that it feels like the challenges, which are listed in orange, outweigh the progress. But we've made progress. Right now, we are doing phenomenal work in the value space. And the hope there is that we'll identify a set of unifying values that could create and maintain a more inclusive culture. So we're all really excited about that. In the training space, our subcommittee has been amazing at reaching out and working with REC and working with other departments, probably some of you in the audience, trying to come up with a comprehensive list of training. So there's been a lot of movement in that regards. On the challenges side, I think I've talked about everything except apathy. And I think there's apathy for many reasons. I think hitting roadblocks is hard. The feeling that nothing is happening creeps in. The feeling that not everyone is invested in the work and that DEI is part of our work, but it's sort of separate, and the burden to fix it is primarily on the committee. Next slide. So it's probably no surprise to you that right now our committee is at an inflection point. And in fact, this event couldn't have come at a better time because we are probably in the next couple of days about to make some big recommendations to our leadership about changes that we may want to consider for the committee. The first one is that maybe 12 to 20 priorities is not such a great idea, and we need to galvanize behind 2 to 3. And maybe that means putting our subcommittees on ice for a little while and having everyone sort of come together to push those 2 to 3 priorities forward. Maybe those 2 to 3 priorities are not so data-driven, but they are more inclusive-focused. Second point, the DEI committee should be a true stakeholder advisory group. We really need to make clear where that delineation is between being a recommender and being an implementer and where we need help in doing that implementation. So that brings me to point number 3. Professional or staff resources would probably be more efficient and effective in trying to move those priorities forward. Next slide. All right, so just some final parting thoughts. I think that these apply no matter where your department is on the journey. And that first one, I cannot stress enough. Communicate, communicate, communicate. We didn't do this enough and we still don't do this enough, and I think it's because DES has a very operational, get it done frame of mind, and we probably feel like we talked about all these things we were gonna do and we haven't done them yet. So we don't really wanna report out on what we haven't done. But you know, the reality of it is that silence is not good. We need to talk about that we're having meetings. We need to talk about the work that's going on behind the scenes. We need to talk about the roadblocks that we're hitting. Second point, we need to integrate DEI into everything we do as an organization. I think in DES, we've gotten really good on a project level at the equity lens, you know, who benefits, who's burdened, who's missing, how do we know and what do we do about it? I think that we have to ask those same questions when it comes to the way that we were organized, our subcommittees, recruitment and retention, pay, promotions, training, developmental assignments, and all the policies that impact staff. You know, if we can get DEI normalizing and organizing, operationalizing internally, then culturally we start to shift and we start to see that shift out in the community as well. Third point, there's no right way to do this work, and I think that, you know, we all realize that we culturally have our own things and our own departments, but we can all learn something from each other, and that's why events like this are so important. Which leads me to my last point, that we continue to share these experiences, that we continue to share our lessons learned, and that we just keep building on that and moving this needle together. So thank you guys so much for your time. That's all I have.
Thank you, Lisa. So next we have well, let me just set it up first. Operationalize really is just, again, that framework. Thank you, Lisa, for mentioning the questions, but it's how do we apply an equity lens? How do we ask the questions and do the analysis on a project or a policy or program basis? And that's really important. I think I heard a couple really great takeaways from about normalize and organize, and I'm really looking forward to having Christine and Laura talk to us a little bit about an example of operationalizing and what that looks like.
Thanks, Samia. So I'm Christine Baker, and this is Laura Castro. We're on the Vision Zero team, and if you haven't heard of Vision Zero, it's a transportation safety program focused on reducing severe and fatal injuries. No one should get hurt or die getting from point A to point B. So we developed an action plan, and as part of that, outlined an equity analysis about transportation safety. And the idea here is to operationalize equity within our transportation system to make sure no one has an undue burden on them or, you know, has a higher risk of maybe being involved in a traffic crash. So yeah, we're here excited to share a little bit about how we did that. And then the goal of this was really to give ourselves a platform for prioritizing transportation safety improvements and engagement for people who really need it the most. Slide. So equity is a key goal of the Vision Zero program. While we were developing the action plan, we looked at how equity data related to crash data and our high injury network, those are corridors that experience a disproportionate number of severe fatal crashes. And we saw a rough relationship there that you can see on the side. So because of that, the action plan included that action item to dig deeper into identifying and addressing imbalances in who's involved in crashes and where those crashes are occurring or at risk of occurring in Arlington. So this analysis was that next step in the action item. Next slide. So big thanks to our interdepartmental steering team who really helped pull ideas together. We pulled this team together because as we started to dig in, we realized that within our little transportation planning and engineering sphere, we didn't have all the expertise we really wanted to bring into the analysis. So we brought together people from the county manager's office, DHS, CPHD, our communications team, and then other folks in different bureaus within DES. And we brainstormed about what information we had available to us and what questions we could ask within that equity lens that we've talked about to help us learn more about transportation safety equity. We did the analysis, all the analysis in-house. Laura did a lot of it, so she'll talk about it in a minute. But then we did find it got a little bit bigger than our expertise, so we brought in a third-party consultant team to help review, quality check our work, and they also augmented the analysis with a literature review that expanded to national practices, and that really helped to ground the findings and help us fine-tune action items on ways that we can start to move forward. The what do we do about it part of the work. Slide. So the first step in our analysis was to identify areas in Arlington with a higher likelihood of historical inequity. We looked at the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments equity emphasis areas as our starting point, which identifies census geographies based on race or income percentages. The MWCOG equity emphasis area criteria are relative to the region, which makes the coverage within Arlington alone relatively slim. So after extensive discussion with our steering group, we arrived at the decision to use equity emphasis areas defined through the Arlington Regional Transit Title VI Federal Transit Administration requirements. So those Title VI areas use thresholds relative to race and income, but the thresholds are more specifically based to Arlington, and that gave us better coverage within Arlington and created some consistency within DES for transportation equity analysis, because that's what our transit team uses as well. So then we looked at these equity emphasis areas in relation to crash data available from our police and state police crash reports. We looked at driver origin data from the crash reports, because knowing where people are coming from and who are involved in crashes helped us to direct resources and education to prevent crashes. We identified systemic risks. That's the intersectionality of crash factors with socioeconomic, roadway, and environmental variables to identify risk factors within equity emphasis areas. We also looked at community requests relative to equity emphasis areas. That included things from the request for service portal, direct inquiries to the county board, safety-related submissions to ART or WMATA, service portals, and applications to the Arlington Neighborhoods Program and the Neighborhood Complete Streets Program. And the goal there was to really identify and understand whether we receive requests more frequently from different neighborhoods and help us to see how that can lead to further inequities in terms of infrastructure and action. And we also investigated hospital data available from the Virginia Hospital Center to learn more about race and ethnicity in relation to the people injured in transportation crashes, because that's not included in the police crash reports. And I'll hand it to Laura to talk a little bit more about the analysis.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So when we investigated each of these analysis areas, we learned that there were indeed inequities. Crashes occur twice as often in equity emphasis areas. In the origin analysis, we found that 60% of people involved in crashes aren't from Arlington, but from the surrounding region. But when you looked within Arlington, people from zip code 22204 were disproportionately involved in crashes. When we looked at systemic risks in equity emphasis areas, we found that the top crash trends involve pedestrians, left-turn conflicts, and were near public land uses like schools. We confirmed that community requests are underrepresented in equity emphasis areas, and we learned that Black or African American individuals were overrepresented in crash-related hospitalizations. Our literature review helped us contextualize and learn more about potential root causes for each of these findings and arrive at a set of 10 action items that specifically elevate equity emphasis areas. When we're conducting safety analysis, when we're prioritizing and funding projects, when we are conducting public engagement or outreach events, as we are educating community members and making information available, and as we plan proactive safety improvements. We will then track progress for each of the action items to ensure that we are getting results. Next slide, please. The tracking metrics we identified include percentages of completed projects in equity emphasis areas, community requests identified and addressed in equity emphasis areas, and outreach events hosted in equity emphasis areas. We'll also be tracking reductions in crashes and vehicle speeds in equity emphasis areas, and we'll be tracking the estimated reach of campaigns in equity and engagement in equity emphasis areas with historically underrepresented groups. We'll report these tracking metrics and identify how to follow up needs when we update the Vision Zero Action Plan in 2025. Next slide, please. The bottom line, this analysis confirmed that there are neighborhoods in Arlington that have historically been overrepresented in our crash data and underrepresented in responses to transportation-related safety requests. The recommendations create a path forward for Arlington to be proactive in addressing infrastructure needs with an equity lens, create a platform to prioritize safety projects in underserved neighborhoods, ensure that reporting channels are clear and accessible to all community members. And by tracking this progress, we commit to reduce and rectify these proportionalities over time. And I'll pass it over to Kristen.
Thanks, Laura. So, we left with these recommendations. We're in the midst of implementing, and I can give a few examples of kind of what it looks like now. So, to address those disproportions in the community reporting, we've started doing equity emphasis area pop-up events on a quarterly basis, and we bring multilingual resources to events. For example, we went to the Tyrrell Hill Community Day in the Tyrrell Hill Park right in the neighborhood last month and brought a little business card with a QR code to the community report a problem channel. And that way, we had an event. It was in an equity emphasis area. We're bringing resources to tell people, here, this is how you can report a problem. And that can help us kind of level that playing field where we're not just hearing from the same people who might know how to find that tool online. We also brought a car seat resource brochure that helps to explain, if you don't have a car seat, here's how you can get one if you need financial assistance. Or if you do have a car seat and you don't know how to use it, here's a link to the ACPD website where you can sign up and get an actual officer to help you, make sure your child is in the seat right, as well as just why is a car seat important. And so we're gonna go to these events every quarter and just try to bring materials very focused on who's gonna be there, because that was a family event. So naturally something that kind of ties in, safety for children. And that way we're getting out, meeting people where they are, and helping to bring that message forward about kind of community safety and how we can all work together to improve safety on our streets. And to address the infrastructure side, we have set up different prioritization tools and criteria that really uses data to help drive decision-making when we're looking at quick build projects or capital projects or things like a new tool coming up, speed cameras, like how to bringing equity into that scoring process to make sure communities are elevated for consideration. And then, to look at equity emphasis areas in terms of risk factors. Right now we are inventorying all the areas that were identified through a systemic analysis that identified certain risk factors, and then just making sure that all of the infrastructure, all the signs, the markings, the sight lines within those neighborhoods meet at least our basic standard, if not higher. So that's just a couple of examples how we're operationalizing. But thank you so much for giving us the chance to share. Thanks.
The importance of normalizing and organizing internally has a tremendous impact on being able to operationalize and assess and see the manifestation of their work. And then when I think about assess, which we're going to talk about now, in a way I feel like that's the visioning, just listening to some of the things that you all have talked about. It encompasses normalizing, it encompasses organizing, it encompasses operationalizing, it takes into effect all of those things. And we have DHS who's going to talk to us a little bit. And when I say assess from our framework, what we mean when we say assess is really, how do we evaluate where we are, what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we are actually doing it, so that we understand what things we need to change, what things we need to adjust, and how do we continue to evolve this work over time. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Anita Friedman and Michael-Dharma Irwin to talk about their racial equity SWOT analysis.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're still hanging in there. And we're from the Department of Human Services, and just wanted to give you a brief overview of who we are in case you need a refresher. Next slide. The Department of Human Services is a very large department. We have about 800 staff, and we have probably 50 lines of business, basically running from working with prenatal moms who are pregnant, to seniors and older adults who are in nursing home care and near the end of their lives, and just about everybody in between, people who are in severe mental health and health needs, and also struggling financially, living in poverty in Arlington. So we are embedded in that place where we see a lot of human suffering. And of course, race plays a big part in that. And so, some people say, well, it's a natural that you would be working on this. But actually, the next slide, please. The origins of our work in this area really stem even prior to 2018, to 2017, when we did Destination 2027, which was led by Dr. Ruben Varghese, who's sitting there in the dark over there. But we took on, Dr. Varghese has led for many years the public health division, and we always do a 10-year assessment of our community health system. And in 2017, one of the focuses, or the primary focus, was to see how we were doing, not from a disease perspective, but from overall health outcomes. And we discovered that there was a 10-year difference in life expectancy from one neighborhood in Arlington to the other. And why? Because of the social determinants of health. Things like housing, access to education, access to health care, literacy, ability to speak English, all kinds of things that also were tied to people's zip codes and census tracts in Arlington. And within Arlington, where we look at the aggregate office and say, oh, we are the healthiest community, or one of the top 3 in Virginia. Well, if you peel that back and disaggregate it, you notice that there are big disparities within Arlington. And that led us to say, this is not okay, and what are we going to do about it? And started working with the county manager's office on this. And 4 of us went down to New Orleans then for a race forward training. And this is before the George Floyd murder. We became familiar with GARE, the Government Alliance on Racial Equity, and we joined GARE, and we started training our senior staff, because even amongst our leadership team, we didn't have agreement on what we should be doing and on whether or not we even understood what racial equity meant. So we took a lot of time just educating ourselves. We formed a racial equity advancement partner group. That's the name of our committee in the department. Is called REAP. We have 40 members. It includes all of the DHS staff. We also decided to start disaggregating our performance measurement plans. We were asking, how much do we do? How well do we do it? And is anyone better off? We decided we don't want to just know, is anyone better off? We want to know who is better off. Within our own programs, are we benefiting people the same or differently? So we started disaggregating data by race and ethnicity. Then we decided we really need, so we were this is all organic. It's not I admire DES that they basically set it out and move forward. We were let's do this. No, this makes sense. We decided this is so important for our department, we need to change our vision, mission, and values. So from 2020 to 2021, we changed our vision, mission, values, not just to talk about strengthening people and making them healthy, safe, and economically secure, but our vision is to have a just and equitable community and free of systemic racism. Because we know that all the systems that we work in, our Department of Human Services, we intersect with education, we intersect with the criminal legal system, we intersect with the health system, we intersect with mental health. There are persistent inequities in all of those systems. So if we are not aware of those and we have to take them into consideration when we work, because they're there. They're right in your face, and the data shows it. So we changed our vision, mission, values. Right now we have 3 subcommittees in REAP who are actively pursuing different kinds of trainings for our department. We have a capacity building. We have community engagement where we're trying to develop policies to bring in people with lived experience into our service delivery and changing our program practices. And then after we did the training with Bird Guess, who's not here, but I wanted to give him a shout out, and he introduced us to the SWOT analysis, we decided, let's do the SWOT analysis. And so here to talk about that is Michael-Dharma Irwin.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Perfect. So what is a SWOT analysis? It's, in the simplest form, a tool that organizations can use to identify big picture strategic priorities. But Bird Guest's model goes a little bit further and really focuses on racial equity. So this chart can show you some of the typical questions that a team might ask and how you add some questions to that to use the racial equity lens. So under strengths, a basic analysis would ask questions like, what are we already doing well and what are our existing resources? With our race equity analysis, we also asked a more specific question. What are we doing to advance racial equity, remove barriers, and eliminate disparities? We focus on items within our control, as those will be most important in building our action plan. For the other domains, the analysis was similar. In weaknesses, we looked at questions like, what resources are we lacking, and what do our customers tell us we could do better? But we also wanted to focus on racial equity in terms of which of our current practices are creating barriers to racial equity. These barriers are often unintentional, the result of past practices that were implemented in good faith, but the negative impacts they're creating on BIPOC populations are real and need to be addressed. The next box, opportunities, is always an exciting one. It generates a lot of ideas. We're asking things like, how are our communities' needs changing? And how could we use our resources differently to better meet them? And in particular, what can we do differently to advance racial equity further and faster? And finally, there's threats. What might impede our ability to achieve our equity goals, such as changes in regulations, expiration of temporary funding sources, or systemic barriers that maintain the systems of oppression that are in place now? Bird Guess's model asked us to do this analysis not just once, but 4 times for 4 key domains: employment, finance, community engagement, and service delivery. Each of those domains presents its own unique opportunities and challenges to advancing racial equity. The next slide shows you the actual tool we use for brainstorming. It's very simple. The colorful boxes are open spaces to brainstorm strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. The questions at the top are things that our Racial Equity Advancement Partners team developed to help structure that conversation, to make sure we had a full, deep exploration of each of these topics. They're aligned with our values. So you'll see questions like, under employment, how are our hiring practices making sure that BIPOC candidates are aware of our positions and able to apply? Under authenticity, how are we training and developing our staff to provide leadership around racially and culturally responsive practices? So the questions were really intended to spur deep conversations among the teams who engaged in this process. As I mentioned, we started the analysis with our department's leadership team. We devoted a 2-hour meeting to each domain, brainstorming responses to the questions and other ideas and taking notes together. Then each division director went back to their division's leadership team and completed the same type of analysis with them. In the end, we had hundreds of ideas in each domain. As Dr. Clark said, it required a lot of qualitative analysis to pull it all together. But the next slide shares briefly with you the major themes that we came up with. One more slide, please. Okay, thank you. So under employment, the themes that we looked into were things like recruitment and hiring, making sure we have a diverse workforce that represents the community we serve. Staff experience, so we make sure we're creating a culture where all employees feel supported and able to be their authentic selves. And pay equity, making sure that staff members who are doing similar work and have similar levels of experience are being paid at similar rates. Under finance, there's also multiple opportunities to advance equity. With vendor development, we want to make sure that BIPOC vendors are aware of and able to compete for contracts with DHS. Under contract requirements, what kind of language can we use to make sure that our vendors are able to meet the diverse cultural needs of the clients that we serve? And for our own internal finance processes, we need to take a hard look at them and make sure that they are not inadvertently creating barriers for our BIPOC clients. Under community engagement, another rich area for us, I know there's a lot more that we can be doing, but we want to make sure that we're effective in communicating with and hearing from the communities that we serve. We want to make sure that we're building relationships in those communities with nonprofits, faith-based leaders, et cetera, to hear from the communities and communicate our messages out to them. And we want to make sure that staff have the tools and the skills that they need to be effective in conducting that outreach. And finally, service delivery, the biggest question. We want to make sure that our services are culturally responsive, that the places and times we're offering them are accessible to BIPOC residents, and that we integrate services as much as possible. We're a huge department, but people need services from each of our units, and how do we make sure we eliminate barriers to access? There were hundreds of ideas generated during this process, but we rolled them up to 35 themes that came up regularly. And at that point, we were finally ready to seek input from all of our staff. We have a survey out now to all 800 of our staff to get their input. We've got 100 responses so far, and it's continuing to roll. And Anita will explain where we are in that process.
So you might ask, how do you get 800 people to agree on these priorities? And that is the crux of our issues. Well, we decided to start at the leadership team. And in the group discussions that will be following, Michael-Dharma will let you into the secret tools that she has developed to do this process. So you don't want to miss that. But we said leadership team. We spent 4 two-hour sessions, each discussing each area of our SWOT analysis. And then we said to the division directors who are in the leadership team, you know, we have public health, we have children and family services, we have behavioral health, we have economic independence. These are all huge divisions also. We said, you go and do the exact same thing with your leadership team, which they did. And we did this also with our XMT, our extended management team, which in our place has about 100 people. So we covered a lot of the management levels. And we came up with some top priorities, which we now have put into a survey to go out to all 800 staff. It's already out, to gain input and agreement on what those priorities should be. And we are going to be putting this into our multi-year DHS Racial Equity Action Plan with short and long-term objectives. It's going to be obviously a long journey because this kind of work takes a lot of commitment and not giving up. And I'm done, but I want to say one lesson learned, Lynn Porphyry, is staff is not going to all be at the same stage, right? You have people who say, come on, we know this, you know, especially BIPOC people who have lived these experiences their whole lives. They're like, are we going to wait around until you people figure it out? No. People, and then there are white people who say, I never heard about redlining, okay? But, you know, there's all kinds of different opinions and different stages. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with that. Some of it may be a reiteration, but you can never reiterate enough when it comes to this work. And the combination of people at different stages brings interaction that is informative and educational, and we require everyone to be committed to this work in our department. And that's it for us.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our presenters. Thank you for the valuable information, the lessons learned, especially. I'm hoping that you have all been able to receive something about each of the key areas of our focus around normalize, organize, operationalize, and assess, and how that might be helpful to you all and all of us collectively as we are moving forward.